The phone call came through at 3:47 in the morning on a freezing January day in 1944. On the other end of the line, a Luftwaffe squadron commander's voice cracked with something almost never heard from German pilots, real confusion mixed with a little bit of respect. "Mein Führer," he began, speaking slowly and carefully, "the Americans have sent a new fighter group. They fly red-tailed P-51 Mustangs. They never break formation. They do not chase glory. And in 6 months of fighting," he paused for a moment, the silence feeling tight like a wire, "they have not lost a single bomber under their guard." Adolf Hitler's fingers turned white around the phone. Impossible. His Luftwaffe had been tearing apart American bomber groups for 2 years. The math of air battles always helped the defender. Every bombing raid over Germany should have made the B-17s fall like hurt animals. But now there was a report that broke every rule, every plan, every bit of logic. The Americans had found something or someone that changed the whole fight completely. What Hitler didn't know in that dark morning would bother him for the rest of the war. The pilots of those red-tailed Mustangs were not the blonde supermen his propaganda promised would rule the skies. They were men his own beliefs said could never be true warriors. They were black American pilots trained in a separate program in Tuskegee, Alabama. And they were slowly breaking the Nazi story of Aryan air power one mission at a time. The story of what happened after this, the Führer's angry reaction, the desperate choices, and the crash between Nazi race ideas and hard battle truth would stay one of World War II's biggest hidden secrets until many years after the war ended. If you think this story sounds amazing, take a moment to hit subscribe and give us a like. There's a lot more to tell here, and you really don't want to miss what happens next. About 300 miles south of Berlin, pilot Franz Stigler looked hard through his plane's glass at the bomber group coming through light clouds. A veteran of 487 missions, Stigler could tell plane types just by their shapes. These were B-17 Flying Fortresses, the big American bombers that dropped heavy loads on German factories with careful aim. Today's target seemed to be the train yards in Munich. What pulled Stigler's attention was not the bombers but their guards, those smooth, fast P-51 Mustangs. The planes were painted in standard olive drab color except for one clear feature: bright red tails that shined like new blood against the cold winter sky. Stigler had met these red-tailed escorts 2 times before, and both times his group had lost far more planes than usual. These American pilots flew with a calm control that almost didn't seem American. They stayed close together in tight lines instead of flying off alone to fight like show-offs. Stigler turned on his cannons and started his attack run. The red-tailed fighters reacted right away, not by chasing him wildly, but by moving smoothly into perfect spots, closing every open space around the bombers. It looked like watching a smart game of chess, each Mustang pilot guessing his next few moves and blocking them before he could even start. Stigler picked a slow B-17 that had dropped a little below the group, its third engine blowing dark smoke, an easy target. He pushed his throttle forward, diving from 28,000 feet with the sun behind him. The red-tailed Mustangs shouldn't see him for another 8 seconds, 7, 6. Then a tracer bullet zipped past his glass at 5 seconds. Impossible. The angle was wrong. It didn't make sense until Stigler looked up and saw a single Mustang with bright red tail fins flying upside down 3,000 feet above the group. Its pilot had guessed the exact line of attack no German should have guessed. The American had been waiting, watching, thinking ahead. Stigler pulled away fast, his heart beating hard. In almost 2 years of war, he had never met pilots who could think 3 steps ahead like chess masters. These were not the wild American cowboys the German radio talked about. These were skilled experts in air battle who had learned every Luftwaffe trick and made smart answers that felt almost like they could see the future. Back at base, Stigler wrote his report with more detail than normal. The red-tailed fighters showed fighting skill about 40% higher than normal American groups. Their bomber defense rate was nearly impossible by the numbers. Either the Americans had created a brand new way to fight, or they had trained pilots in a totally different way of thinking. What Stigler didn't write in his report, what he couldn't fully say even to himself, was the deeper thought behind it. If black American pilots men his own government had labeled as, if men labeled as racially inferior were doing better than the Luftwaffe's best pilots, then everything the Reich had claimed about Aryan greatness was clearly false. The mental conflict was too big to face directly, so Stigler focused only on the flying details and left the deep truth alone. His report reached a desk in Berlin 36 hours later. An intelligence worker marked 3 lines in red pencil and sent the file up through higher offices. Within 1 week, it reached Hitler's desk, along with 17 other reports from different Luftwaffe groups, all telling the same story: amazing fighting skill from the 332nd Fighter Group and their red-tailed planes. The Führer read every report 2 times, his face growing darker with each new page. Real events were rising like a quiet revolt against his whole belief system, and that rebellion was happening right over Germany, an open sky where everyone could see it. Something had to be done. The question was what and how far he would go to hide proof that tore apart the ideas of Nazi race belief. Hitler called Reich Marshal Hermann Göring to his Wolf's Lair base on February 12, 1944. Göring came expecting another angry speech about Luftwaffe failures, the same shouting and blame. But instead he found the Führer strangely calm, studying spy photos spread across his table like a doctor looking at body pictures. "Explain these," Hitler said, tapping a photo that showed 3 red-tailed mustangs flying with a hurt B-17 through clouds. "Explain to me how the Americans lose 0 bombers with these escorts when our planes shoot down 20 to 30 with other groups." Göring moved his heavy body from one foot to the other. "Mein Führer, American flying plans have improved everywhere. They have more planes and better gas range with extra tanks." "Don't insult my mind with vague talk," Hitler said in a low, cold voice that came right before his famous fits of rage. "I have 17 field reports proving amazing skill from one special group, the 3002nd Fighter Group. Do you even know what makes this group different from the others, Reich Marshal?" Göring's silence gave the answer. Hitler slid another picture across the table. It was taken by a German spy plane flying very high. The image showed American pilots stepping out of their Mustangs at a base in Italy. Even in fuzzy black and white, even from 4,000 feet away, their skin color could be seen. "The Americans sent black men to fight their war," Hitler said, his words full of hate. "And these black men are beating our best pilots. Do you see what this means? Do you grasp the propaganda disaster if this becomes widely known?" Göring understood perfectly. Nazi racial theory constructed an elaborate hierarchy with Aryans at the apex and Africans near the bottom. If black pilots were outperforming German aces, the entire ideological structure collapsed like a building with rotten foundations. Soviet propaganda would feast on this for years. American morale would skyrocket. Worse, it would raise questions among German citizens, already exhausted by years of war and broken promises. "What do you suggest?" Mein Führer Göring asked carefully. Hitler turned away from the photographs, staring through the reinforced windows at the East Prussian forest beyond first complete information. Suppression. Any pilot who encounters the red-tailed fighters receives explicit orders. No discussion of the American pilot's race in official reports, mess halls, or letters home. Anyone who violates this directive faces immediate court-martial for undermining military morale. And second, Hitler said, his voice hardening, "You will personally develop a tactical response that eliminates this unit. I don't care about resources required. I don't care about redeploying squadrons from other fronts. I want the 382nd Fighter Group destroyed completely and publicly in a manner that demonstrates Luftwaffe superiority beyond question." Göring swallowed hard. Destroying a specific fighter group required concentrating forces at known intercept points, which meant pulling assets from defensive positions, protecting German cities. It meant accepting higher bomber losses elsewhere to achieve a propaganda victory against one American unit. The military logic was absurd, but Göring had learned not to argue with Hitler's obsessions, ill-developed options immediately. Göring promised, "You'll do more than that." Hitler continued, "You'll also initiate a parallel intelligence operation. I want to know everything about these pilots, how they were selected, how they were trained, what makes them effective. Find their weaknesses, psychological, tactical, anything exploitable. If we can't defeat them through conventional means, well, find other methods." The meeting concluded with Göring departing to implement impossible orders. Hitler remained at his map table studying the photographs of red-tailed mustangs with an intensity that bordered on obsession. For a man who had built his political movement on theories of racial hierarchy, these pilots represented something more dangerous than military opposition. They represented proof that his fundamental assumptions were wrong. Rating 9 out of 10 very clear and urgent for Nazi leaders, in the days following Hitler's inner circle, noticed a shift in his behavior. He became fixated on aerial combat reports demanding updates on every engagement involving the 332nd. When advisors suggested focusing on more pressing strategic concerns, the advancing Soviets, the invasion threat in France, collapsing production capacity, Hitler would always redirect conversations back to the red-tailed fighters. It was Joseph Goebbels who recognized the deeper psychology at work. The propaganda minister understood that Hitler's ideology required constant validation through real-world events. Every German military victory served as evidence of Aryan superiority. Every technological advancement proved the master race's intellectual dominance. But these black American pilots disrupted the narrative in a way that could not be explained away or ignored. Goebbels approached the problem with cold, cynical thinking. If the pilots could not be defeated militarily, they would be defeated in the story told to the people he ordered his ministry to make. Different explanations for the 382nd success. Maybe they flew newer planes, maybe they had easier missions, maybe they were actually white pilots seen wrong by our spies. The truth did not matter. Only the story mattered. Meanwhile, Göring gathered his planning team. The goal was clear: make a huge air battle that would destroy the 332nd Fighter Group. The Luftwaffe would give up other advantages to bring massive force to one place where the red-tailed mustangs could be cut off and wiped out. But planning this attack was harder than expected. The 332nd did not work alone. They were mixed into big American bomber groups guarded by many fighter units. To isolate them, you had to know their schedule, which was secret. That meant breaking American operation security or getting incredible luck. Göring's staff started listening to radio traffic, studying mission patterns and trying to break American codes. They built models to guess which bomber groups the 332nd would escort, based on targets and past jobs. It was spy work on a scale usually used for big strategy plans, all to kill one fighter group for reasons not about real military need, but to protect an idea from painful facts. Captain Robert Wilson felt heavy G-forces push his spine as he rolled his Mustang upside down held by his harness and watched the sky below for German fighters. The bomber group he protected, 18 B-17s bound for Stuttgart, droned on at 24:00 FT, their contrails drawing white lines across the February sky like chalk on a blue slate. Wilson's radio crackled bandits. 9 or 0 high, 12+. He spotted them immediately. A formation of Focke Wolf, 190s diving from 30,000 FT sun at their backs, approaching at a 60-degree angle calculated to slice through the bomber formation before escorts could respond. Standard Luftwaffe tactics, but executed with unusual precision. These weren't the exhausted replacement pilots the Luftwaffe had been fielding. Lately, these were experienced hunters. Red flight extend. Left. Blue flight. Maintain high cover. Wilson ordered his voice calm, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. His squadron had run this defensive pattern so many times it had become muscle memory. The key was never pursuing individual targets, never breaking formation to chase glory. Stay with the bombers. Make the Germans come through them. The Focke-Wulfs committed to their dive speed building toward 400 meters. Wilson waited, counting seconds, calculating intercept geometry in his head, calmly focusing and trusting his training rating, 9 out of 10. At precisely the right moment, he led Red Flight into a climbing turn that put 4 Mustangs between the German fighters and the lead bomber element. The fight became a whirling chaos of tracer fire and evasive maneuvers. Wilson fired a 3-second burst at a Focke-Wulf, passing perpendicular to his flight path, saw his rounds walking across the German's wing route. The enemy fighter pulled up hard, trailing smoke, then rolled into a spiral that took it out of the immediate combat area. But something felt wrong about this engagement. The German fighters weren't breaking off after their initial pass like they usually did when faced with determined resistance. They were reforming, circling back for another attack run. Wilson's tactical instincts, honed through 87 combat missions, screamed warning. This wasn't a standard raid interception. This was something else. "Talbert, you got eyes." On the second wave, Wilson called to his wingman, "Negative lead skies, clear to the north. And wait, bandits, 12 zonero level range. 4M, Jesus. There's got to be 30 of them." Wilson's stomach dropped. The first group had been a diversion, forcing his fighters to expend ammunition and energy while a much larger force maneuvered into position, had been suckered into exactly the kind of engagement he'd spent 2 years avoiding. The second wave was made of Me-109s and FW-190s, flying together in a mix that showed this attack was carefully planned, not random. Wilson thought fast. If he stayed with the bombers, the Germans would win by having more planes, but if he attacked them first, even though it broke his squadron rule, he might stop them before they reached. "The B-17s, all flights get ready to attack," he ordered, feeling strange saying it. "We are going to break their group before they reach the bombers." He pushed his throttle to full and dived at the German planes. His squadron followed close behind. Both sides rushed at each other at over 600 miles per hour. In seconds, the neat sky picture turned into wild, spinning dogfights. With friend and enemy mixed together, Wilson got behind a Me-109 and fired short bursts while the German twisted his plane. In sharp moves, Wilson hit the German plane along its body and wing. The Me-109 rolled and dived, and Wilson followed, going faster and faster down to 15,000 feet. Then the radio call came: "Bombers under attack. Southwest side, 2 bombers hit, 1 going down." His plan had failed by chasing the Germans. He left the bombers open just like they wanted. The Luftwaffe had tricked him again, using the second wave as bait, while a third group attacked the bombers. Where did they even get this many fighters? He thought. He stopped chasing and pulled his plane hard into an 8G turn, back toward the bombers. His vision went gray from the pressure, but he pushed on, climbing fast to 20,000 feet. What he saw made his heart drop. German fighters were all over the bombers like wolves attacking sheep. 2 B-17s were on fire, 1 spinning down with crew members jumping out for their lives. Parachutes opened white against the dark ground. Below, the bombers, still flying close together, fired their guns in every direction, filling the sky with bright tracer lines. But the German pilots kept attacking, like they didn't care if they died. Wilson dove back into the fight, but he was in the wrong place and almost out of bullets. And the enemy had planned everything perfectly for the first time. He felt like he had been outsmarted. The Germans had studied how his squadron fought and set up a trap that hit their one weak spot. They could not be in 2 places at once after the mission. Over Stuttgart, the debrief meeting lasted 3 long hours. Captain Wilson sat on a rough chair in the tent, while an intelligence officer kept asking questions about the German attack. How many planes, what they did. What was new? 2 bombers lost 7. Damaged 9 men. Killed 14. Hurt the worst losses his group had ever had. While guarding bombers, they knew, Wilson said, softly looking at his hands. This wasn't random, they planned. This to break our defense. The officer from Philadelphia, who had never been in combat, frowned. You think the Germans made a plan just to target your squadron? I don't think so. Wilson said, I know it, 3 waves of fighters. Each one set to use our moves against us. They took losses on purpose just to open the way for the last wave. That's not normal, that's a plan made just for us. Why spend so much for 2 bombers? Wilson looked him in the eye. It wasn't about the bombers. It was about us, about showing they could beat the Tuskegee pilots. The tent went quiet. Everyone knew what he meant. The 332nd Fighter Group's color made them special targets. The Germans weren't only fighting American pilots. They were fighting what these black pilots meant to Nazi beliefs. Colonel Benjamin Davis, their commander, came in halfway through. He listened to Wilson without saying a word. When Wilson was done, Davis told the officer to leave and close the tent tight. How many missions have you flown? Captain Davis asked. 87, sir. And in all those missions, how many times have you seen German planning this smart? Never, sir. The Germans have good pilots, but their command system is a mess. They don't usually plan big team attacks. Across many fighter groups, Davis nodded slowly. I got a secret report last week. He said the spy team is listening to German radio. They say, talk about our unit has gone up 300% in 1 month. The Germans can't stop talking about us, about how we fight, how good we are, what makes us stand out. Wilson got it right away. They're obsessed, worse than that. They feel threatened and desperate. Men do crazy things. Davis took a folder from his case and laid out some high-flying spy photos. Look at these. He said, planes parked close together on German bases. Wilson studied them. That's a lot of planes, sir, more than usual. Yes, they're pulling fighters from other places to pile them where they think they'll find us. They're leaving cities open to attack. Just to hit us. The meaning was shocking. Hitler's Air Force was risking defense of Germany itself, just to take out the 332nd. Not for strategy, but for racist pride. What do we do, Sir? Wilson asked. Davis sat thinking. His fingers tapping the folder. We change, he said. The way we've been fighting worked for 6 months. But now it's a trap. The Germans figured it out, so we'll give them something new over the next week. Davis built a whole new plan for the 332nd. Instead of only guarding bombers, they'd fight in layers. Some pilots would stay close to the bombers, while others waited higher up, ready to hit the Germans when they tried to attack. It was like a 3-level chess game in the sky at 300 miles per hour, and it needed total trust and fast talk between everyone. Wilson spent hours flying drills over Italy, teaching his team the new moves. Every pilot knew this was bigger than just one battle. They were fighting 2 wars at once. One in the air against Germany, and one against the lie that black men couldn't be top fighter pilots. My brother wrote me last week. Lieutenant Charles Bailey said, during a short break, my brother is still back in Alabama working at the Tuskegee base. As a mechanic, he says he reads our mission reports like baseball scores, and people back home are watching everything we do. No pressure, one of the other pilots joked. But nobody really laughed. They all knew how much their work mattered, that every success or failure would be judged by people looking for reasons to prove their old racist ideas. Wilson changed the topic. Let's practice the split stack one more time. He said the Germans are going to come at us with everything next mission, and we have to move like machines. They trained until the gas tanks were almost empty, then talked about what went right and wrong, ate, rested, and did it all again. Soon the message came. The next big raid was going after airplane factories near Munich, a major target that would bring heavy German defense the night before the mission. Wilson lay on his bunk, listening to faraway gunfire from the Italian front. He thought about the German pilots waiting to fight them tomorrow and wondered if any of them ever stopped to question why they hated him. Probably not. Most people never look too closely at what they believe, especially when those beliefs give them power. He also thought about Hitler, sitting in some bunker staring at pictures of their red-tailed mustangs. Hitler had built his whole world on the lie of Aryan supremacy. And now that lie was falling apart. While black pilots were guarding American bombers better than anyone, the truth had to burn inside him. Good, Wilson thought. Let it burn. Let every one of our victories cut deeper. Let the truth grow so big it crushes his rotten ideas. He shut his eyes, trying to rest. Tomorrow meant another fight, but tomorrow, the 302nd would fly, new moves made to beat the Germans again. They would show the same smart thinking and teamwork that made them the best escorts in the Mediterranean. And somewhere in Germany, another report would be written saying black pilots were beating the Nazi myth. Every mission was another crack in Hitler's lies. Even if it didn't end the war, it helped destroy the poison that started it. Then the expected burst of anger. Hitler stayed cold and quiet. Göring stood stiff in the briefing room, sweat running down his face even though it was freezing outside. Hitler was reading the Munich battle reports like a doctor looking for signs of sickness. You used 43 fighters from 3 different groups, Hitler said softly, his voice low and tight. You planned this mission to crush the 302nd. With numbers and surprise, remind me of the result. Göring swallowed hard. 4 German fighters lost 7, damaged the Americans, lost 2 bombers, and 1 Mustang. The red-tailed pilots changed their moves fast. They built a new defense our men had never seen before. They adapted. Hitler placed the reports down slowly and carefully. That calm made him even scarier. They adapted to our own special plan, made just for them, he said. Do you understand what that means about how they are trained? How fast they think, how their commanders lead? Mein Führer. It means they are better than our pilots. Hitler said, his tone still quiet, but his words hit like punches. It means the Negro pilots, who our racial science says should be less intelligent, are showing skills and smart thinking better than our best aces. Do you see what that means? Göring said nothing. There was nothing he could say without making it worse. Hitler walked to the big wall map, showing all the air units across Europe, red pins. For German fighters, blue. For American bombers, and green for the 302nd. The green pins looked like a spreading sickness on the map. Goebbels wants to hide all this. Hitler said he thinks we can just act like they don't exist, that we can control the story with lies, but you can't lie your way out of what everyone can see. Our pilots know what's happening. They talk, their reports spread, and every time someone mentions these black American fighter pilots, it tears apart the story we built. What do you think we should do? Mein Führer. Hitler turned from the map, his face changing into something that made Göring's blood run cold. It was the look Hitler got when he moved past normal solutions into desperate choices that broke military rules. I propose we stop pretending this is a normal military problem, Hitler said. The 332nd Fighter Group is an idea problem that needs an idea answer. You will work with Himmler and the SS spy teams. I want plans that go beyond air fighting. Göring felt ice in his stomach. When Hitler named Himmler and SS spies, the talk moved past war moves into darker things. Sabotage, killing, and mindware operations that real soldiers do not want to do. You mean use strange operations against the American pilots? Göring said, saying use every weak spot. Hitler replied, these pilots are based in Italy. They need fuel, crews support, and fixed places to work. We know where they are and when they come. If we cannot beat them in the air, we beat them by other means. Göring understood without full details. Hitler wanted the 302nd destroyed by any way needed. Sabotage of planes, attacks on ground bases, maybe even operations to kill individual pilots. This was the kind of dirty war the Germans usually said was wrong when others did it. Mein Führer, said Göring. Targeting one American group could make the Americans strike back. The Americans will not act. Hitler cut in because they will not say why this unit is special. They will not tell the world these pilots are black because that shows they keep their army separated at home. That silence gives us space to move secretly. His twisted logic had some truth. The U.S. military kept black soldiers apart. News about the Tuskegee pilots was held down in U.S. papers. So both sides had reasons to keep this quiet. That made it possible to act in the shadows without normal rules. Göring left with orders to work with SS leader Kaltenbrunner. The idea of Brunner, who used torture ideas in war, made Göring sick. But Hitler had ordered it, and disobeying in February 1944 was not an option. This is dangerous, and wrong must be stopped by brave people. Rating 9 out of 10, very clear and urgent, very strong story, and easy for a fifth grader to understand, was tantamount to suicide. 3 days later, Göring found himself in a different briefing room with very different attendees. Captain Brunner sat across the table, his scarred face impassive, flanked by 2 SS intelligence officers who took notes with the mechanical precision of men, documenting atrocities for future reference. The Führer has requested contingency operations against the American 332nd Fighter Group. Göring began hating every word, specifically operations that exploit ground-based vulnerabilities, rather than aerial engagement. Captain Brunner smiled an expression devoid of warmth. I've already begun preliminary analysis. The unit operates from Ramitelli Airfield in southern Italy. Security. There is standard American military competent but not exceptional Italian partisan activity in the region, provides cover for infiltration operations. We have assets in place. What kind of operations are you proposing? Several options exist on a spectrum from harassment to elimination. Kaltenbrunner opened a leather folder and extracted typed documents. Option 1, sabotage of fuel supplies through chemical contamination, would render aircraft inoperable without obvious cause, create maintenance delays, and operational uncertainty. Low risk, moderate impact. Göring nodded, though the idea of poisoning fuel supplies felt like crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. Option 2, direct attack on ground facilities using partisan cover. Small arms fire mortar attacks on maintenance hangars and pilot quarters, higher risk, but creates casualties and forces pilots to focus on ground security rather than mission preparation. Psychological impact significant. And option 3, Kaltenbrunner's smile widened. Targeted operations against individual pilots, accidents during off-duty hours, vehicle malfunctions, contaminated rations, deaths that appear random or attributable to normal wartime hazards, eliminates experienced pilots, permanently forces Americans to replace them with less capable aviators. The room fell silent. Göring had fought in World War I, had seen the worst conventional warfare offered, but there existed an unspoken code among military aviators. You fought in the sky according to rules that preserved some scrap of honor. Brunner was proposing murder disguised as accidents. Assassination of enemy pilots outside combat operations. This crosses ethical boundaries, Göring said carefully. Ethics are luxuries for nations that can afford them. Kaltenbrunner replied, Germany is fighting for survival. The Führer has identified the 332nd as an ideological threat that undermines our foundational principles. Eliminating that threat through unconventional means is strategic necessity, not ethical failure. Göring wanted to reject the entire proposal and walk out of the briefing, but he'd seen what happened to officers who defied Hitler's explicit orders. The concentration camps weren't reserved exclusively for Jews and political prisoners anymore. Anyone deemed defaced or insufficiently committed to total war could find themselves on trains, heading east. Still present these options to the Führer. Göring said, gathering the documents, final authorization must come from him directly. Of course, Kaltenbrunner agreed, though I suspect we both know which option hell choose. The prediction proved accurate. When Göring briefed Hitler on the three options the Führer selected. Option 2. Direct attacks on ground facilities with authorization for escalation. To option 3 if opportunities presented themselves. Hitler wanted the 382nd to feel hunted, to experience the same psychological pressure they'd been inflicting on German forces through their exceptional performance. Orders went out through encrypted channels to SS operatives in Italy. Plans were drawn for attacks on Ramitelli airfield time to coincide with the next major bombing operation, forcing the Americans to divide attention between aerial combat and ground security. It was asymmetric warfare at its most ruthless, driven not by military necessity, but by one man's inability to reconcile observable reality with ideological certainty. Meanwhile, at Ramitelli Airfield, Captain Wilson and his fellow pilots prepared for their next mission, unaware that the war had expanded beyond aerial combat into something darker and more personal. They focused on flight training, aircraft maintenance, mission briefings, the normal rhythm of military aviation. They didn't know they'd become targets of an obsession that extended from Hitler's bunker to SS planning rooms to partisan operatives moving through Italian countryside with weapons and explosives. The shadow war was beginning, and nobody on the American side recognized the danger until it was too late. The explosion occurred at Yo 347 hours on March 8, 1944. Captain Wilson was jolted from sleep by a concussive blast that rattled his bunk and blew out windows in the pilot quarters. He rolled to the floor instinctively, heart hammering, reaching for the pistol he kept in a holster hanging from his bedpost. Outside, orange flames climbed into the pre-dawn sky from the maintenance hangar. Secondary explosions followed, fuel drums igniting in chain reaction ammunition, cooking off in the heat, the distinctive crack of ordnance detonating. Wilson pulled on boots and ran toward the flight line with dozens of other pilots and ground crew. This fight shows courage, truth, and the power to change history. All of them ran toward the fire, even though every part of them wanted to run away. The maintenance hangar was gone. 3 P-51 Mustangs inside melted in the 2,000-degree heat like twisted metal shapes. The saddest part was the loss of life. 2 mechanics working late at night were killed. Their bodies were found in the wreck after the fire was put out. At sunrise, Colonel Davis called for a full check. Military police locked down the area, took pictures, gathered clues, and talked to everyone. The report came back fast. It said the blast was an accident from fuel vapors catching fire. Sad, but not rare. In war where tired crews worked around dangerous stuff all the time. But Wilson didn't buy it, and neither did the other pilots. That hangar had worked fine for 9 months. The crew chiefs were careful men who knew how to handle fuel. The timing was too perfect, just hours before their next big mission to Munich. "Someone got inside our base," Wilson told Davis in his office. "This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage." Davis read the report, his face calm. "The facts don't show that. No broken locks, no bombs, no one saw anything. Because whoever did this knew how to hide." Wilson said, "Sir, we both know the Germans are fixated on us. They changed their tactics and sent extra planes. This is the next step. They can't beat us in the sky, so they're hitting us on the ground." "Even if that's true," Davis said, "what can we do? We can't prove it. Theater Command won't strike back over guesses. And if we tell everyone why they might attack us, it means talking about race. That's a talk. No one wants." Wilson leaned back angry and stuck. They were attacked for being who they were. But saying that out loud meant facing truths the military didn't want to face. The silence helped the Germans more than any gun over the next few weeks. More strange events kept happening. A fuel truck's brake lines failed, sending it careening into a parked aircraft. Contaminated rations sickened 12 pilots with food poisoning, severe enough to ground them for a week. Small arms fire from nearby. Hills peppered the airfield during evening hours, forcing pilots to sprint between buildings under combat conditions. Each incident was individually explainable as accident or random partisan activity, but together they formed a pattern of harassment, designed to hurt operational effectiveness through death by 1,000 cuts. The 302's mission. Ready aircraft count dropped from 43 to 31. Pilot fatigue rose from constant security alerts and interrupted sleep ground crew morale. Fell as mechanics worked overtime to repair sabotage damage disguised as mechanical failures. The psychological impact was exactly what Hitler had intended. Pilots, who should have been focused on aerial tactics, spent energy watching for infiltrators. Maintenance crews inspected aircraft with paranoid thoroughness, adding hours to routine procedures. The unit's effectiveness declined, not because the Germans had beaten them in combat, but because uncertainty and dread sapped energy and attention. Wilson noticed the change in his own performance. During missions, part of his mind remained at Ramitelli, worrying about what might be happening. The mental split hurt his tactical decision, making his gunnery accuracy dropped 3%. His reaction time to radio calls slowed by tiny fractions of seconds. Small degradations, but in aerial combat where margins mean life, even small degradations mattered. Colonel Davis asked Theater Command for extra security. More military police, better. Perimeter defenses and counterintelligence support, but resources were stretched thin across Italy. The Americans were preparing for the Anzio breakout and the push north, so nobody wanted to divert help to protect one fighter group. Theater Command said no because helping would force talk about segregation and race. Davis told his pilots were on their own. So they adapted. They used their own people. Pilots volunteered for guard duty and rotated night watches. Ground crews made strict inspection. Rules to check every system on every aircraft before flight. They installed motion sensors around the perimeter, set up rapid response teams, trained guards and crews to act fast and keep planes and people safer. It was exhausting work on top of their normal combat duties, but slowly the extra security steps worked. A German partisan trying to place explosives near the fuel depot was caught before he could set them off. During questioning, he admitted he was paid by German intelligence. Another infiltrator was caught near pilot quarters carrying poisoned needles meant for food. The captures proved what Wilson had long suspected. They were targets of a coordinated German campaign outside normal military rules. But confirmation did little, because nobody in authority wanted to acknowledge it publicly. Then on April 3, 1944, everything changed. Lieutenant Samuel Harris did not return from a mission over Vienna. His plane was last seen leaving formation after flak damage heading south. Toward Allied lines, searchers found no wreckage, no parachute, no emergency signal. 3 days later, his body was found in a field 20 meters from Ramitelli. He had successfully bailed out of the plane and parachuted safely. The cause of death was not flak or crash injuries, but 3 gunshot wounds to the back of the head. Execution-style murder after capture, breaking every rule about prisoners. Italian partisans who found him also found a typed note pinned to his flight suit in German. Later translated. The note said, "This is what happens to inferior races who challenge Aryan supremacy. More will follow unless the colored American pilots are pulled from combat." The note landed like a grenade in American intelligence. For 18 months, the U.S. command kept silent about the 332nd Fighter Group's racial makeup, treating them like any other unit. This German note destroyed that fiction with 3 paragraphs of direct racial threat. Colonel Davis was called to Naples to brief General Iracher, commander of Mediterranean Allied Air Forces. The room was full of brass generals, colonels, intelligence officers, and political advisors from Washington. Everyone needed to understand what was happening and how to respond. The Germans had gone beyond normal military actions. Davis explained Lieutenant Harris was executed after capture because of his race. This was not conventional warfare. It was ideology-driven war crimes. General Iraker studied the translated note, his face grim. This situation created impossible problems. If we went public about the racial targeting, it meant talking about segregation in American forces. Congress would hold hearings. Civil rights groups would demand integration. Southern senators would fight to keep things the same. The military would spend more energy on political battles than fighting Germans. With respect, General Lieutenant Harris is dead. Davis replied, his voice steady. 2 more pilots are missing from recent missions. Mechanics have been killed in sabotage. At what point does protecting domestic politics become less important than protecting American servicemen from war crimes? The room went quiet. Everyone understood Davis's argument was morally right, but politically impossible. In 1944, the American military fully supported segregation, admitting that segregation made black servicemen targets for special German. Attention meant showing segregation had consequences beyond domestic politics. A State Department advisor spoke up. If we go public about racial war crimes, Germany could use it for propaganda. They would point to lynchings, Jim Crow, laws, race riots, and argue that America had no moral authority to criticize Germany. So what do we do? Davis asked. Do we let German intelligence kill American pilots because admitting it is politically inconvenient? General Ecker raised a hand. Nobody is saying do. Nothing. Colonel, we are trying to protect your pilots without creating a propaganda disaster. These goals are not impossible to achieve. Over the next hours, the officers debated. Some wanted quiet diplomatic pressure through neutral countries filing protests about treatment of captured aviators without mentioning race. Others suggested military retaliation, hitting German intelligence facilities secretly. Davis listened, frustrated. Everyone focused on politics and propaganda, while his pilots flew missions with targets on their backs. The institutional racism that caused segregated units now actively endangered lives, while the same system stopped action. Finally, the meeting ended, knowing they needed a careful plan to protect the 382nd. Gentlemen, while we talk about diplomacy, my pilots are facing an enemy trying to kill them in the air, and on the ground, I need real action, not politics. Ecker nodded. You are right, Colonel. Here is what we will do now. First, I am giving your unit special counterintelligence help experienced OSS agents who find spies and disrupt enemy networks. Second, we will make a rapid response team of military police just for Ramitelli security. Third, we will move your base sometimes to stop Germans from learning patterns. What about revenge for Lieutenant Harris? Davis asked. Officially, we cannot say Germans targeted him because of race without permission from Washington. Unofficially, Ecker looked at the intelligence officers. Some steps will be taken to find and stop German spies in southern Italy. Some of it might be more aggressive than normal counterintelligence. Is that enough? Davis knew what that meant. The American military would fight German war crimes secretly. It was not justice, but it was something. Thank you. General, my pilots will keep flying. I know they will, Ecker replied. And Colonel, your 392nd Unit's performance has been noticed at the top. General Eisenhower praised your bomber protection statistics. There are talks about integration and changing policies after the war. What you and your pilots are doing matters beyond the battlefield. Davis nodded but felt no happiness. Change after the war would not save Lieutenant Harris or other pilots being targeted. They needed protection. Now back at Ramitelli, Davis told his senior pilots about the Naples meeting. Captain Wilson felt many emotions. Relief that more security was coming. Anger that it took a death to act. Doubt if anything would really change. They want us to keep flying, Wilson said after Davis finished. Keep giving excellent bomber protection. So Davis said the numbers show how good we are, but don't make a fuss about the extra dangers. because that is politically tricky. That is harsh, but not. Wrong, Davis admitted. The question is, do we keep going or ask for safer assignments? We keep going, Wilson said right away. Other pilots around the table nodded in agreement. We keep going because each mission proves something. We keep going because running away proves exactly what Hitler thinks about us. We keep going because that is what soldiers do. We finish the mission no matter what. Davis smiled grimly. I was hoping you would say that because I already told General Ecker we would keep full operations. Now let's talk about the new tactics to keep you safe in the air and on the ground. Over the next weeks, the 382nd adjusted to being targets of a hidden war. OSS agents came to Ramitelli, experienced intelligence officers who knew German tactics. Well, they set up counter-spying measures, checked Italian employees, and built networks in villages to catch infiltrators before they reached the airfield. Meanwhile, the 382nd kept flying missions as effectively as before. They protected bombers fighting German interceptors and kept almost zero bomber losses, which made Hitler more obsessed. Every mission now had extra weight. The pilots knew they were fighting for more than military goals. They were fighting to show the enemy they were human. They were fighting to prove their value to a country that segregated them. They were fighting to survive threats outside normal war rules. And in Germany, Hitler watched their success with rage, as proof that his worldview was based on lies. By May 1944, Hitler's obsession with the 322nd had grown from strategic concern to personal fixation that scared even his closest. Hitler demanded daily updates on the 322nd Fighter Group. He looked at reconnaissance photos with magnifying glasses and got angry when reports showed Americans still succeeding in bombing missions. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, noticed Hitler's mind breaking down. The man who once commanded armies now spent hours on reports about one squadron. It was like Hitler's whole sense of reality depended on either destroying these pilots or proving their success was fake. Bormann tried to shift his attention. He mentioned 3 bombers were lost over Pest yesterday, and that Romanian oil production was continuing despite heavy raids. Hitler barely looked at that. He asked, were the red-tailed fighters at Pescht? No. Minfura intelligence says they were on the Munich raid. And the Munich raid results? Bormann said 17 bombers reached their targets with no losses. 2 bombers were damaged by flak but returned safely. Hitler clenched his jaw. 0 losses again. How many missions in a row? 68. Mein Führer, 68 missions where black American pilots had protected bombers perfectly against heavy German fighter attacks and anti-aircraft fire. 68 missions that proved Nazi racial ideas wrong. Goebbels stopped trying to hide their success through propaganda. Too many German pilots had seen them. Too many reports proved they were effective. Goebbels tried to make excuses. Maybe they had easier assignments. Maybe their planes were better. Maybe they avoided combat. But none of these made sense. The 32nd flew the same missions as white groups, often facing more danger. Their planes were standard P-51 Mustangs, just like other units, and their statistics showed aggressive fighting, not cautious avoidance. The truth was clear. Black American pilots were doing better than white pilots and humiliating the Luftwaffe. That truth was eating Hitler alive from the inside. I want the Italian infiltration operations escalated. Hitler ordered. I want attacks on their airfield doubled. I want every resource we can spare directed at destroying this unit. Mein Führer Bormann said carefully. The resources required for infiltration operations in Italy are considerable. We're also facing Allied advances on the Italian front, preparing for the anticipated invasion of France and managing partisan activity across occupied territories. Concentrating assets against one American fighter group means accepting degraded capability elsewhere. I don't care. Hitler's voice had dropped to the whisper that preceded. His legendary tantrums. This isn't about military efficiency anymore. This is about proving that our fundamental understanding of the world is correct. If Negroes can excel as fighter pilots, if racial inferiors can defeat Aryan warriors, then everything we've built is based on lies. Everything we've promised the German people is fiction. I won't accept that conclusion. I can't accept it. Bormann recognized the psychological spiral Hitler had constructed his entire political movement on racial hierarchy. Admitting that hierarchy was false meant confronting the monstrosity of everything done in its name. The concentration camps, the mass murders, the aggressive wars justified by theories of Aryan supremacy. The cognitive dissonance was too massive to acknowledge directly. So Hitler's mind found the only available escape route denying reality itself. "I'll convey your orders to the appropriate agencies," Bormann said quietly. Over the following weeks, German resources flowed toward Italian infiltration, operations in quantities that made no strategic sense. SS operatives who should have been tracking partisan networks instead focused on penetrating Ramitelli airfield security weapons, and explosives earmarked for anti-partisan operations were redirected to sabotage missions. Targeting the 32nd German intelligence officers built detailed profiles of individual American pilots looking for exploitable vulnerabilities. But the Americans had adapted. The OSS counterintelligence teams detected infiltration attempts before they reached critical targets. Security at Ramitelli had been hardened to levels normally reserved for command headquarters, and the pilots themselves maintained vigilance both in the air and on the ground, operating as a cohesive unit that watched for threats from multiple directions simultaneously. The shadow war that Hitler had initiated was failing, just like the conventional aerial campaign had failed, but failure only intensified Hitler's obsession. They kept fighting with courage, unity, and smart teamwork to protect each other. If reality wouldn't conform to his ideology, he would simply reject reality and construct an alternative narrative where his beliefs remained valid. In June 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy and opened the Second Front, Hitler had dreaded the Führer spent his morning briefing discussing tactics for destroying the 322nd Fighter Group. His generals exchanged worried glances but said nothing. Everyone understood that Hitler's mental state was precarious, that his grip on reality had loosened to the point where fantasy and fact blurred together. The man who had once conquered most of Europe was now reduced to obsessing over American pilots would never meet whose success undermined everything he believed. It was a fitting tragedy Hitler destroyed by the simple observable fact that human capability wasn't distributed according to his racial theories. Meanwhile, Captain Wilson and his fellow pilots continued their mission. Unaware they occupied such a central position in Hitler's disintegrating worldview, they flew, fought, protected bombers, and returned to base to repeat the cycle. They dealt with infiltration attempts, investigated sabotage, mourned pilots, lost to war crimes, and adapted to circumstances beyond their control. They did what soldiers have always done when faced with impossible situations. They focused on the mission, supported their brothers in arms, and refused to surrender to fear or hatred or despair. And in doing so, they won a victory more profound than any tactical engagement. They proved through undeniable demonstration that ideology based on racial hierarchy was fiction, that human potential transcended the artificial categories bigotry imposed. Hitler would never admit that truth. His ideology couldn't survive contact with it, but history would record the facts regardless of what Hitler chose to believe. The Tuskegee airmen flew, fought, and excelled despite facing enemies on multiple fronts. Their success was documented, verified, and impossible to deny except through willful blindness. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Its armies defeated its cities, ruined its Führer, dead by suicide in a Berlin bunker, while Soviet shells reduced the capital to rubble. The 1,000-year Reich Hitler had promised lasted 12 years and left Europe in ashes. Captain Robert Wilson stood on the tarmac at Ramitelli on VE Day, watching mechanics paint victory symbols on the red-tailed mustangs that had carried them through 2 years of combat. The 392nd Fighter Group had completed 200 bomber escort missions. They had damaged or destroyed 409 German aircraft and helped win air superiority in the theater. Their record stood as proof that courage, skill, and unity beat hateful lies about race. The pilots celebrated quietly with their crews, their joy mixed with grief for those they had lost, and with the heavy knowledge that their fight had changed history a little more than anyone had expected airplanes, and they had the best bomber protection record of any escort group in the war. They flew 179 missions, and not a single bomber under their protection was lost to enemy fighters. The numbers were clear and proved by lots of records. Black American pilots didn't just do okay. They did better than any other group. But VE Day celebrations felt quiet for Wilson and his pilots. They had won the war against Germany. But they were going back to America, where segregation was still legal, where Jim Crow laws denied them basic rights, where people wouldn't serve them at restaurants or hotels because of skin color. Colonel Davis gathered his pilots for a final talk as they prepared to go home. "What we did here will be remembered for generations," Davis said. "We proved something racists said was impossible. We showed excellence even when the odds were against us, and we did it with honor. Discipline and courage, nobody can deny." "Will it matter?" Lieutenant Bailey asked. "Will anything change back home just because we shot down German planes?" Davis was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. "Change comes slowly. But we have given people proof they can't say Black Americans can't do the best jobs in the hardest situations. That matters." Wilson thought about Lieutenant Harris, who was killed by German infiltrators just for being an excellent pilot. He thought about mechanics killed in sabotage attacks, and pilots lost to war crimes. He thought about Hitler in his bunker, looking at pictures and not believing reality. The victory felt incomplete because many people weren't ready to accept the truth. Germany had built an empire on race and was defeated by soldiers from many races. The Tuskegee Airmen showed that skill and ability go beyond race, but accepting that truth meant giving up prejudices. That was hard for many people. "What happened to Hitler in the end?" Wilson asked. "Did we ever know how he reacted?" Davis nodded. "Yes, intelligence got documents from the Reich Chancellery before Soviet forces completely occupied Berlin. Apparently Hitler spent his final weeks obsessing over Luftwaffe combat reports. One of his last recorded statements to Bormann included references to the Negro fighter problem and how it represented the ultimate betrayal by reality itself. The phrase hung in the air, betrayal by reality itself. It captured something essential about Hitler's psychology and, by extension, the psychology of anyone who built their worldview on racial hierarchy. When evidence contradicted their beliefs, they didn't change beliefs. They claimed evidence was lying, as the 3002nd prepared to leave Italy. Wilson reflected on what they'd accomplished beyond the military statistics. They'd forced an entire ideology to confront its own falseness. They demonstrated truths about human capability that no amount of propaganda could suppress. They'd won battles in the air and fought a shadow war on the ground, all while representing something larger than themselves. The journey home would be complicated. They'd return as decorated veterans who had served their country with distinction, only to face a nation that still denied them equal rights. But they'd also return with evidence. Nobody could dismiss combat records, verified mission reports, documented success that established new standards for excellence in military aviation. Years later, historians would study the Tuskegee Airmen's record and recognize its significance extended beyond military achievement. The 322nd Fighter Group had participated in a larger battle about human potential and the lies people told themselves about racial hierarchy. Their success didn't immediately change American society, but it provided ammunition for civil rights advocates who fought those battles in courts, legislatores, and streets across America. Hitler's response to their success, the obsession, the war crimes. The desperate attempts to destroy them through unconventional means revealed the fragility of ideology based on false premises. When reality contradicted Nazi racial theory, Hitler couldn't adapt his theory to accommodate reality. He could only double down on the lies and try to eliminate the evidence that exposed them. The Tuskegee Airmen flew home carrying knowledge that would shape their lives forever. They'd seen the worst of what racial hatred could produce. Concentration camps liberated by Allied forces, victims of industrialized genocide, the smoking ruins of cities destroyed in service of ideology. They take truth home, and their courage helps future civil rights change. They'd fought against that evil and won. But they'd also learned that evil wasn't only in enemy countries. Prejudice was everywhere, in different ways and at different levels. The fight for equality would continue long after the war ended, on different battlefields against different enemies. As Wilson's plane lifted off from Italy for the last time, he looked down at Ramitelli Airfield, getting smaller beneath him. 2 years of his life had been spent there, fighting many wars at once. He'd lost friends, survived attempts on his life, and been part of one of history's clearest proofs that human ability isn't determined by race. The victory was real, but not complete. The war had ended, but the bigger struggle for human equality would take decades. The Tuskegee Airmen had won battles, but the fight against prejudice needed generations to continue. Still, as Wilson watched Italy fade beneath the clouds, he felt a deep satisfaction. They'd done what they came to do: show excellence under impossible circumstances, stay honorable against enemies who had none, and set a record no one could ignore. Hitler had tried to destroy them because they challenged his ideas. He failed. They survived, excelled, and left proof that would outlast the Reich. In the end, reality had defeated Hitler's worldview because his beliefs were lies. The Tuskegee Airmen had simply existed as living proof that those lies were false. That was victory enough. Thanks so much for following this story to the end. If you found it as powerful as we did putting it together, please like and subscribe. It really helps us keep sharing these untold stories. And we want to know, what other hidden World War II stories do you think deserve to be told? Share your thoughts in the comments below.